Good morning, or whatever time this is that you're watching it. It's morning when I'm filming. And what a week we have had since I've spoken with you last. We have a new president now. I guess you guys probably watched the election coverage last week and up until Saturday. I guess it's still sort of going on, but it looks like we have a president-elect Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris now. It's an exciting time to be taking this class because a lot of the things we talk about are really in the news right now. First, a few housekeeping items. If you have not taken exam 2, please let me know. Almost everybody has, but there are a couple of you who did not take it. If you have a reason that you were not able to take it, please reach out and let me know. It is 20% of your grade. You don't want a 0 on that. So reach out and let me know, and I'll see if I can make some sort of accommodations if you have a good reason why you haven't taken it yet. We will have one more quiz next week, and then we're gonna get through 2 chapters this week, 1 chapter next week, and have a quiz. And then I think we just have 1 more chapter after that and a final exam. And that's when your essay will be due. A little bit about that. So I've uploaded your essay prompt onto Blackboard. It is also 20% of your grade, same as an exam. So make sure that you do it and make sure you know what you're doing. What I suggest, so the instructions are posted on Blackboard. I ask for it to be 3 to 5 pages double spaced. And I know you're submitting it into Blackboard, and so it's gonna translate funny, but just when you post it into Microsoft, when you write it in Microsoft Word, so that way you'll know how long it is, or whatever word processor you use. I guess most of you probably use Word. You'll know how long it is that way. And then copy and paste it into the part on Blackboard. So I've got it open. It's almost listed the same as the way a test is, except for it's like it asks the question and then you can just copy and paste your essay into the block part on Blackboard. If you have any questions about that, let me know, but I think it should be pretty easy. That way I won't have to worry about having all of you guys email it to me, and that would just be overwhelming. I think this is the simplest way to do it. So let me know if you have any questions. That is due on your last day of class, which is coming up soon. I can't believe we're almost done, guys. What a fun crazy time to have this class, and what a fun semester. I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to do this in person, but I hope you guys have gotten something out of this. Let me know if you have questions, and we'll go ahead and get through all this today. Okay. Today we're talking about political parties, and what an interesting time, right? So our book talks about in the 2016 election, and I guess there's probably going to be an update because a lot has happened in this past week that we can really update this on. But I'll kind of talk about what the book says and how I interpret how they're going to talk about it the next time they write it. Hi, Betsy. In 2016, honestly, both party candidates were challenged by quote-unquote outsiders. So the Republican Party, obviously, Donald Trump was not was not somebody that sorry, distracted. Was not somebody who had been in politics before. And the Democratic candidate in 2016 was Hillary Clinton. She entered as the front runner, but there was this moderate left Democrat. Or she was a moderate left Democrat, liberal at heart, who'd been toughened as first lady. She was a senator from New York, Secretary of State under Obama. And she seemed as establishment as they come, but she didn't expect the outsider to sort of shake things up, who's Bernie Sanders. He's an independent senator from Vermont, ran as a Democrat, but ran in a majority party because you can't really run as an independent and for president. You get a lot more attention if you run as a Republican or a Democrat. Bernie Sanders did really well with young voters, the working class, and voters who really don't identify with a party. He did well in states with a caucus, which is a discussion-based process that rewards intensity of support and willingness to spend time to choose the candidate. Bernie Sanders really left Hillary Clinton battle-scarred with a reputation of being inauthentic and untrustworthy. A lot of people who initially backed him never really transferred their support to her. The Republican field, sort of the same thing. Like I just said, there was a crowded field in 2016, a very crowded field that was deeply divided between the establishment, economic conservatives, and social conservatives. But then Trump came in and stole the show. You know, he had this entertainment value that was such that he garnered hours of free media time as cable stations covered his rallies, hoping he'd say something outrageous, and he usually did. They covered his rallies and hoping that and enjoyed that he was running against sort of the political correctness that kept a lot of us from expressing our true feelings. He promised to make America great again, and then he decimated the field. He mocked and bullied his competition and knocked them out of the race. It was unexpected. Trump's outsider, anti-establishment stance really appealed to those who felt that DC had gone too corrupt, too dysfunctional, and too removed from their concerns. So Sanders and Trump were these two outside candidates who really had a huge impact on the nomination process to parties which they barely had any ties at that point. This year, I think, is a little bit different. Joe Biden obviously was the more establishment candidate. He came in obviously as Barack Obama's vice president, but he did have sort of an outsider, Kamala Harris, as his vice presidential nominee. She, I think, is a freshman in the Senate. She's been around for a while, but she's sort of new to those of us in politics. She came in and sort of stole the show, and it's really interesting to see a woman, and especially a woman of color, who is able to really make such progress in this country, and it's really incredible to see. So, yeah, that being said, all right, political party. What is a political party? It's a group of citizens who are united by ideology, who seek control of the government in order to promote their ideas and policies. Their means to an end are recruiting and nominating, electing candidates for office. This can be kind of divisive. For one party to win, another has to lose, right? We're cynical about partisan bickering and gridlock that can result when rival parties stubbornly refuse to budge from their positions to achieve a compromise in the public interest. But that's how politics works. Political gridlock is the stalemate that occurs when political rivals, especially parties, refuse to budge from their positions to achieve a compromise in the public interest. You are chatty today. Skepticism about political parties has been a major feature of American politics since the drafting of the Constitution. James Madison wrote in Federalist No. 10 that liberty is to faction what air is to fire. He said factions are a permanent fixture within our representative system, but he really wanted to have their effects limited by creating a large republic with a lot of varied interests. George Washington echoed Madison's concerns and warned against the baneful effects of the spirit of party general in his farewell address as president. But it was too late. There were parties then and there are parties now. Most scholars think that parties are essential to a functioning democracy. They haven't damaged the Constitution, and they kind of provide extra constitutional framework of the rules and institutions that enhance the way the Constitution works. So why political parties? Probably because Madison hoped they would not thrive. Political parties aren't mentioned in the Constitution, but their role, parties seek to promote their ideas and policies by gaining control of government through the nomination and election of candidates for office. Both interest groups and parties seek to influence governmental policies, but only parties that gain this influence by sponsoring candidates in competitive elections are successful. Parties are crucial to maintaining the democracy for three reasons. The political linkage. They link voters and elected officials, and they hope to tell voters what candidates stand for and providing a way for voters to hold their officials accountable for what they do in office. The second is unification of a fragmented government. Parties help overcome some of the fragmentation in government that comes from separation of powers and federalism. The founders' concern was to prevent government from becoming too powerful, but they were so successful in dividing up power that without the balancing effect of party to provide some sort of connection between state and national government or between president and Congress, the American government might find it hard to achieve anything at all. But parties lend sort of coherence only when they can control several branches of government. So we're going from having a Republican president to a Democratic president now, but the Congress is still going to look the same. The Democratic majority in the House of Representatives is going to be less than it was in the next Congress, but the Democrats are still going to be in control of the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi will likely still remain the Speaker of the House, and in the Senate, we're waiting for Georgia's election results to come in on their Senate seat. They had a runoff, but it is likely that the Republicans will remain in control in the Senate, and that Mitch McConnell will retain the majority leader position in the Senate. So we're still going to have a divided government. That did not change in this election, just FYI. And then the third thing that parties can do is provide a voice for the opposition. Parties provide an articulate opposition to the ideas and policies of those elected to serve in the government. Some citizens can decry partisanship, and sometimes they seem to be motivated by possibilities for party gain as much as by principle or public interest. And others see partisanship as providing the necessary antagonistic relationship that, like our adversarial court system, keeps politicians honest and allows the best political ideas and policies to emerge. Partisanship, we've talked about, is the loyalty to a political cause or party. Party organization is the official structure that conducts the political business of parties. The top of the Democratic Party is the Democratic National Committee. Top of the Republican Party is the Republican National Committee. The party in government, these are party members who have been elected to serve in the government. The party and the electorate are ordinary citizens who identify with that party. So public opinion surveys determine party identification by asking respondents if they think of themselves as a Republican or a Democrat. Obviously, party identification is your voter affiliation with a political party. Do you identify as a Republican or a Democrat? Maybe not either, but that's the question. Capturing one's party base is not sufficient to win an election, though. A party base is the members of the political party who consistently vote for that party's candidates. You have to also reach the middle if you're going to be a successful politician. So the responsible party model. This is party government when 4 conditions are met. Clear choice of ideologies, candidates pledge to implement ideas, parties held accountable by voters, and party control over members. Each party needs to present a coherent set of programs. The candidates should pledge their support to the party's platform. Voters need to make their own choices about which party's platform most closely reflects their own. And then while governing, each party should exercise control over its elected officials to ensure that party officials are promoting and voting for its programs, thereby providing accountability to the voters. Democracy is strengthened when voters are given clear alternatives and hold the parties responsible for keeping their promises. Political parties give us a way of holding these officials accountable for what they do collectively as well as individually. The responsible party system fits in some systems, like Parliament in Great Britain, quite well. They're strong and disciplined. They determine both parties that are appropriate for a parliamentary system, whereas the majority party controls both legislative and executive branches. But there's changes in our system that have brought us closer to this model. But even as the parties have become highly polarized like we have now, there's a growing disconnect between their behavior and the demands of our own constitutional system of checks and balances and separation of powers. So what about, do American parties even offer voters a choice? A key feature of the responsible party model is that parties should offer voters a choice between different versions of how government should operate. It should be a choice, not an echo, as was said by Barry Goldwater in 1964. Parties are very distinct in their ideologies, memberships, and parties that they stand for. Each party represents different perspectives about the way the government should be used to solve problems. Partisan sorting is the process through which citizens align themselves ideologically into 2 parties, leaving fewer citizens remained in the center, and this really increases party polarization. Hyperpartisanship, we've talked about before. This is a commitment to party so strong that it can transcend other commitments. We are living in a very hyperpartisan time, but I'm really hopeful right now. This election really has given me some hope that we're going to be able to find some compromise, that we're going to be able to move to the middle a little more, that both parties have some work to do now after sorry, there's a fly in here. Both parties have some work to do now, that, we will maybe work towards finding that middle common ground and some compromise. But right now we're very hyperpartisan. What about party membership? Party ideologies are attracted and reinforced by a coalition of different voters. Democrats' post-New Deal liberal ideology reflects the preferences of its coalition of more working and lower-class voters. Union members, minorities, women, elderly, more educated urban dwellers. Republicans' conservative ideology reflects the preferences of upper to middle-class whites, those who are in evangelical and Protestant religions, and rural and suburban voters. That's just typically the way it's been. This election was a little bit different. It seemed that a soccer mom, honestly, a white middle-class suburban mother, was somebody that neither party could really capture. And the election was really trying to figure out who that voter was going to vote for. It's still really interesting to kind of watch. I mean, that's me, who am I going to vote for? What are my preferences now? And they have shifted some over the years, and it seems that it's happened that way across the nation. Candidates run on a party platform. A party platform is a list of policy positions as a party endorses and pledges its elected officials to enact, pledge them to enact. It's the national party's campaign promises, usually made in a presidential election year. This is what we heard Trump and Biden talking about, their platform. The responsible party model that I just talked about requires the parties offer distinct platforms, that voters know about them and they vote on the basis of them, and that parties ensure that their elected officials follow through in implementing them. There are party differences that are necessary for popular control over the overall directions of the governmental policies. So how do we keep the core ideological base satisfied while appealing enough to more moderate voters than they can win elections, so they can win elections in diverse constituencies? Internal forces that draw the parties away from each other, but external forces can push them together. So the pull toward extremism. A lot of forces within the parties keep them distinct. They need to placate party activists, raise money, keep the candidates true to their own beliefs as well to their own base. And the main players are called the party faithful or the party activists. These are the rank and file members who carry out the party's electioneering efforts. They're not an official organ of the party, but they are the party's lifeblood. These are the folks who are going to be there no matter what. The push toward moderation. Ideological pursuits don't always win the day. If a candidate's going to win an election, he or she must appeal to more voters than does the opposing candidate, right? Even though the ideologies of the parties are distinct, the pressures related to winning a majority of votes can lead both parties to campaign on the same issue positions, making them look similar to voters. So when we have the extreme polarization like we have now, forces that work toward modernization are weaker than they usually are. Parties can deal with the tension between activists and the larger body of moderates in ways other than by changing party positions. One strategy is to emphasize partisan issues that are more popular with moderates, or to reframe the issues in a way that are more palatable to voters. So what about the history of parties in America? For James Madison, parties were just an organized version of potentially dangerous political association, the faction. He'd hoped their influence would be minimal, but it happened really fast. In the 1790s, Hamilton and Adams formed the Federalists. Jefferson and Madison founded the Democratic Republicans, and so on and so forth. It happened fast. The evolution of American parties. The chief among the goal was getting elected to office, running the government once they were there. In 1828, Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson turned the Democratic Party away from the focus on party and government to creating the first mass-based party and setting the stage for the development of the voter-oriented party machine. The party machine. This is a mass-based party system where parties provide services and resources to voters in exchange for votes. The Jacksonian Democrats enacted a number of party and government reforms designed to enhance the control of party leaders, known as party bosses, over the candidates, the office holders, and the campaigns. Party bosses, you are loud. Party bosses are party leaders, usually in an urban district, who exercise tight control during the electioneering and patronage. During the nominating process, the party bosses would choose the party's candidates for the general election. The most common means is the party caucus, which is a special meeting of handpicked party leaders who appointed the party's nominees. Patronage. This is a system, we've talked a little bit about this before, where the successful party candidates were rewarded their supporters with jobs or with favors. So, if you support Biden, he is going to reward you by giving you a job when he's elected. That's patronage. Because the Democratic Party machine was really effective at getting votes and controlling the government, the Whig Party and later the Republican Party used these same techniques to organize. Parties were really effective at mobilizing voters. The average participation rate in the early 1900s was about 80%. That's crazy. It's not nearly that high now, even this year. But the strength of these party machines was also their weakness. Parties would do almost anything to win, including directly buying the votes of the people, mobilizing new immigrants who couldn't speak English. What's wrong, baby? And resurrecting dead people from their graves to vote in elections, which is something that we're hearing about now a little bit. The patronage system came under attack as representing favoritism and corruption. Political reforms like the party primary and civil service reform, where government jobs started to be filled on merit but instead of party loyalty, did a lot to ensure that party machines went the way of the dinosaur. A party primary, this is an election where party candidates are nominated by registered party members rather than party bosses. That's what we have now. Though America, we haven't had a revolutionary war since 1776, but we have several times changed our political course in rather dramatic ways. We can do this now through a ballot box instead of a bloody war. Over the course of the last 2 centuries, there are two-party systems. The two-party system in the United States has been marked by periods of relative stability lasting 25 to 40 years, with one party tending to maintain a majority of congressional seats and controlling the presidency. These are called party eras, extended periods of relative political stability in which one party tends to control both the presidency and Congress. Then a critical election happens. It's an election signaling a significant change in popular allegiance from one party to another. And then you have what's called realignment, a substantial and long-term shift in party allegiance by individuals and groups, usually resulting in a change in party direction. De-alignment is the opposite, a trend among voters to identify themselves as independents rather than members of a majority party. The United States has gone through about 6 party eras. That was hard to say, I don't know why, in the last 200 plus years. Parties today, the New Deal coalition supported the fifth, you are so funny, supported the 5th party era, has changed, but no single critical election has marked a clear realignment across a relatively long series of elections. That has included the massive migration of white Southerners to the Republican Party and the less massive but still notable trend for Catholics to be less solidly Democratic than they were at the formation of the New Deal. So since the 1980s, party identification has strengthened, but along more consistent and ideological and less regional lines. Changes have been labeled as differences between red and blue American states. Obviously, Southern, Midwestern, and Mountain states are red states, support Republicans. Coastal and industrial Northeast are blue states and support Democrats. My 4-year-old came in from preschool last week and said his teacher told him to come back and tell him what color South Carolina was on the map after Tuesday night. And he woke up Wednesday morning. He said, Mom, I need to see a map. He said, look, South Carolina's red. I was like, buddy, South Carolina's always going to be red. Give me a baby. So what do parties do? Running elections in order to control government and execute policy agendas. Parties can play an important role in American democracy by providing a link between citizens and government, coherence in government, vocal opposition, closely tied to the 2 main activities of the party, electioneering and governing. Electioneering is the process of getting a person elected to a public office. It involves recruiting and nominating, defining an agenda, and getting elected. Recruiting a candidate, excuse me. It usually begins months before the general election. They recruit a strong candidate to run. They target winnable races where a seat is open. They don't necessarily have an incumbent, somebody who's running for re-election, or maybe where the incumbent is plagued by scandal or mishap, or where there are strong electoral indicators that maybe the party has a good chance of winning the seat. Then you nominate. Okay, so the nomination phase is the formal process through which the party chooses a candidate. Party primaries are the dominant means for choosing candidates. They usually occur 3 to 4 months prior to the general election. There are different types of primaries. Closed primaries. These are primary elections where only registered party members can vote. When I lived in Virginia, when we were in Washington, D.C., we were registered Republicans. We had to go vote in only the Republican primary. That is a closed primary. Here in South Carolina, we are not that way. You don't register as a party, and so you vote in what's called an open primary. This is the primary election where eligible voters don't need to be registered party members. You either vote in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. You can't vote in both, though, but you're able to vote in either one. Many people complain about this because it can permit about the open primaries because it can permit members from the other party to get involved in the nominating process. Say, for instance, you can really send a lot of Democrats to vote in the Republican Party primary to maybe nominate a candidate that you think your Democratic candidate would have a chance of beating. Does that make sense? Bernie Sanders also, though, he identified as an independent, obviously. He's argued that there should be more open primaries because they're the only ones that allow Democrats to vote. Since the only ones that are allowed... Hold on a second, let me say that again. There should be more open primaries since the ones that allowed only Democrats to vote shut out a lot of his supporters. Come here, baby. Come here. In presidential primaries, voters don't choose the actual candidate they want to run, but they elect delegates. Delegates are usually party activists who support a candidate and run for the opportunity to go to the national convention and the nominating convention in the summer. The nominating convention is the formal gathering to choose a candidate. We had to do it virtually this year. Where they set their policy priorities, elect their party officers, provide a sense of solidarity. It's usually where the vice presidential nominee is announced. It's televised now, which changes the dynamic, and it's really a rubber stamp more than it used to be. What are you doing? After nominating a candidate, a party's role is to develop a policy agenda. They represent policies that the party's candidates agree to promote when campaigning and to pursue when they govern. Then there's the general election. Where are you going, baby? This means changing from choosing among candidates within the party and developing agendas to getting its nominated candidates elected. You have radio, TV, internet. These are really dramatically changing the way the party and candidates are relating to voters. Candidates can run their own campaigns, their own staffs. They buy TV and radio ad time. They maintain websites. They tweet out announcements to followers. Candidates present themselves on their own terms, and party affiliation becomes just one of the many characteristics of a candidate, not the sole identifying feature. Money is central in a capital-intensive campaign, and parties are major fundraising organizations, probably because of a loophole in campaign finance law that allows parties to collect contributions of unlimited sizes from donors. Parties really became major banks for candidates in the 1990s. These unlimited funds were called soft money and were used by parties for party building efforts like voter registration and issue development. This soft money, this is unregulated campaign contributions by individuals, groups, or parties that promote general election activities but don't directly support individual candidates. They're supposed to represent an independent expenditure of money. But in 2010, the Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission case, you just sometimes hear people talking about Citizens United. It said the Supreme Court changed the financial and political landscape of politics. The Supreme Court decided that individuals and organizations could give unlimited amounts of money to what's called a super PAC. A PAC is a political action committee that are independent of the candidates and even the party's campaign efforts. Those with deep pockets and willingness to spend have the ability to exercise enormous influence in the electoral arena, and they can do it anonymously. Where are you going? Where are you going? Once a party's candidates have been elected to office, the attention turns to the matter of governance. These are activities directed toward controlling the distribution of political resources by providing executive and legislative leadership, enacting agendas, mobilizing support, and building coalitions. When a party controls the government at national and state levels, it means the party determines who occupies leadership positions. Like I've talked about before, when Trump was elected, he controlled the government. He had a Republican president, he had a Republican Senate, and he had a Republican House of Representatives. Like I just mentioned earlier, now Joe Biden is not coming into the same government. He is coming in to having a Democrat president, a Democratic House of Representatives, and a Republican Senate. So that makes it a little bit different. It makes it more difficult for things to get done, to get passed. So the goal is to after you're elected, is to execute a party's political agenda. How each party represents an alternative vision for how to approach and solve problems. They usually implement about 2/3 of what their platform promises. And divided governments, but when you have a divided government like we happen to have now, it's hard. It's hard for a president to get most of his agenda accomplished. So voters determine if a party's candidate should be rewarded through re-election or punished by throwing the rascals out. So if they're not happy with how they've governed in the past 4 years, they can re-elect a new president, just like we just did. All right, characteristics of the American party system. We are increasingly polarized and decentralized here. The party systems vary around the world a lot. Some countries only have one major party that maintains its power through institutional controls, totalitarian states like China, sometimes through corruption and informal means of physical coercion, like Mexico until recently, through military control. Come here, baby, come here. Through military control, like Burma, Libya, Sudan, prevents any meaningful party competition, and without choice, democracy is really impossible. Come here, baby. Make that real quick. Here, where'd you go? Come here. You enjoy this? All right. So through our American government is predominantly two-party system. We have had some third-party movements that have come and gone throughout history, but they've tended toward ideological moderation, but they're pretty far apart ideologically today. We've had two specific parties, Democrat, Republican, and you really have to be one of those to have a viable chance of winning elective office. So why a two-party system? The United States has had few of the serious political splits that are usually responsible for multiple parties, stemming from language, religion, social conflict. Both Republicans and Democrats predate the Industrial Revolution, the urbanization and suburbanization of the population, and the rise of the information age. They've weathered several wars, the Civil War, 2 world wars, as well as a lot of economic recessions and depressions. But the most important reason that we keep a two-party system is that the rules of the system, in most cases, were designed by the members of those two parties, and so it makes it very difficult for third parties to do well on a permanent basis because those parties did not design it. In the United States, we use the single-member district electoral system. The candidate who receives the most votes in the defined district wins that seat, and the loser gets nothing. This winner-take-all system creates strong incentives for voters to cast their ballots for one of the two established parties, because voters know they're effectively throwing out their votes when they vote for a third-party candidate. State election laws ensure the place of both parties on the ballot and make it difficult for a third party to gain access. And third parties are hampered by existing federal election laws. They also don't have the access to national media for a third party. Congress insisted on a special exception that allows, you are so chatty, that allows a special exception that allows participation in a televised debate to be limited to only candidates from the two parties. The debate commission requires candidates to reach 15% in the polls before they're even invited. Over the years, there have been a number of third-party movements that have tried to alter the makeup of politics. They usually arise to represent specific issues that the parties have failed to address, like prohibition in 1869, or to promote ideas that weren't part of the ideological spectrum by existing parties, like socialism with Bernie Sanders. The Tea Party movement was not actually distinct from the Republican Party. Most Tea Partiers actually identify as Republicans, and a lot of so long as the Republicans adopt most of the issues Tea Partiers care about, they're not like to separate from an organized party of their own. And they're actually not really even a party. They're not even called the Tea Party anymore. I think they're called the Freedom Caucus now. The third parties can really have a large impact on the presidential election, though. When the winning margins are large, third parties may merely be a blip on the screen, but when the electorate is narrowly divided, the presence of these third-party candidates is fraught with peril. So, a good illustration of this, you've seen the Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison ads, right? So, Bill Bledsoe was the third-party candidate in that election. He ended up dropping out and endorsing Lindsey Graham pretty early on, but Jamie Harrison's campaign, Bill Bledsoe actually made it onto the ballot. He dropped out, but the ballots had already been printed. So, Jamie Harrison's campaign used that to confuse folks and tried to kind of split some of Lindsey Graham's votes off to have people support Bill Bledsoe, because he thought that maybe there would be a really tight margin in that race, and that maybe some of people who would normally vote for Lindsey Graham voted for Bill Bledsoe instead, maybe Jamie Harrison would have a chance of winning. It was a really nasty, kind of really dirty trick. He wasn't successful. Lindsey Graham was reelected, but it was really interesting. My husband and I are such political nerds. We were really watching this like, what? We can't believe that this is happening, that he is what a dirty trick, all these Bill Bledsoe commercials that you're seeing, that if you did your research, you realize were being paid for by Jamie Harrison. It was just unreal. But that is a way to have an impact on an election, is to have a third party kind of come in and mess up your numbers if you have a tight margin. The United States, we have increased our ideological polarization. We have a rather limited menu of viable parties. We have moderately liberal versus a moderate conservative, maybe both parties continuing to agree on fundamental features of American politics, but the policy differences have really grown. Decentralized party organizations. In American politics, local and state party organizations make their own decisions. They have affiliations with the national party organization, but no obligations to obey its dictates other than by selecting delegates to the national convention. The decision-making is really dispersed across the organization rather than centralized at the national level. Power tends to move from the bottom up instead of the top down, meaning that local concerns and politics dominate the lower levels, and this molds the structure and policy agendas. This can be called fragmented party organization. The RNC and DNC, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, they're responsible for taking care of the national party's business between their nominating conventions. Then you have state organizations that are professional. They've been more professionally organized since the 70s. But the biggest reason for fragmentation control of the American parties is federalism and political reforms like the direct primary. All of the candidates are elected in elections that are to some extent governed by state laws. So members of the state legislatures and Congress are attached primarily to the state parties that constitute much of the electoral base, but their ability to run depends on their surviving the local context of contested district or state or primary elections, and the national parties have at best only indirect influence over these. So historically, the American party organizations have been notable for their lack of hierarchical, top-down power structure, which is a source of frustration. They really wish for party discipline, the ability of party leaders to bring party members in the legislature into line with the party program. This is more of a European parliamentary thing. So what about you? What about citizens and political parties? Though political parties are important to the success of a democracy, they're unpopular with the public, right? Voters are turned off by partisan bickering and each party's absorption with its own ideological agenda instead of concern for the public interest. But the bickering itself may be a safeguard against American democracy, or a safeguard of American democracy. Americans often see politics as a dirty business, but it really is our saving grace since this allows us to resolve conflict without violence. But Americans don't see it as our saving grace because maybe we've enjoyed domestic tranquility for so long, we don't know what it's like to have to take our disagreements to the streets and battlefields to resolve them. The media doesn't help. Instead of explaining the substance of policy debate to American citizens, it treats politics like one long, bitterly contested sporting event, right? Democratic politics is messy by definition. Authoritarian government is neat and tidy and efficient, but perhaps we should recognize that partisanship is not a failure of politics, it's the heart of politics. There are 3 things that we can do as citizens to offset our frustration with the partisan course of American politics. We could get real and have realistic expectations of what a democratic government looks like. We can get involved. We have easy access to the parties. And then third, maybe don't split your ticket. If you are disturbed by what you see as government paralysis, try voting a straight party ticket. If you vary the party from election to election, you'll be able to hold the party accountable for government performance. All right, that was a lot to get through. So that was political parties. Tomorrow, I will come back with, if this will open, my lecture on interest groups, and that will be what we do this week. We will have one more quiz and then get through a couple more chapters, and that'll be it for the semester. Please email me if you have questions about the essay. Hopefully that prompt is straightforward enough. As far as sources on, I think I said you can use your textbook for one of your sources and you need 2 sources. It says to use a book, but you can use an online source as long as you cite it properly. Make sure you're using correct citations. All right, I think that's all I've got for you guys. Always reach out if you have questions, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.